And what is that smell?
Oh my God. Hey. Where'd you go?
I'm sorry, who are you?
Gemma.
Hello to all you amazing innies and outies and out there, and welcome to my deep dive breakdown and review of Severance Season 2, Episode 7. If you've watched enough television over time, you sometime come across an episode that you know is just going to be special. The way it's shot, the writing, the direction, the acting, but more importantly, the feeling it leaves you with while you're watching the episode and also after you're done. I'll speak for myself when I say this is one of those special episodes. I am just so happy that I was able to experience it and witness this episode, and I'm even happier to be sharing my thoughts about it with you all on how I thought it was just truly incredible. With that said, I hope you all had your box of tissues next to you while watching this, as it is time for us to discuss and break down this incredibly emotional episode. Spoilers ahead. Now, before breaking down this episode, let's talk about the significance of the title, which is Chikhai Bardo. It's the first stage of death, a razor-thin boundary between life and the final breath. Now, to take it even further, in the Buddhist terms for the fourth and sixth Bardos, stages of intermediate states that a soul experiences, 3 in life and 3 in death. This Bardo is the first of death, experienced immediately after physically dying, when the consciousness separates from the body. Now, this is when one either sees the light of reality and merges this light to achieve enlightenment, liberation, and escape from the cycle of rebirth, or due to the fear of attachment, fails to recognize it and continues to go through the other further states of dying. Now, this is the stage in which rituals and prayers to the dying or dead help to guide them through towards the light. Now, with that understanding, keep that in mind while we go through this breakdown. Now, we open this episode with a flashback to seeing Gemma walking into work at the university. As we get this overhead shot that made me feel like these people were seen as ants in the eyes of Lumen. Now, there will be many references in this video, more than most that I've done in the past, that will highlight the shot selections and the possible intent and the meaning behind them, because this was one of the most technically sound episodes to date of this series. Now, cut to seeing a younger, less broken down version of Mark, who's looking more like Ben Wyatt, his character that he played in Parks and Rec, as he notices this beautiful woman next to him as they're both donating their blood. Now, Mark makes his move and takes interest in what she's looking over.
Themes of religious conversion in Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich.
Oh my God.
Now, the importance of this book is it explored the meaning of life and the pursuit of meaning and the inevitability of death. The story is about a man who recognizes the emptiness of a life lived for personal gain and social status. Now, we watch as they share a laugh over one of Mark's students' paper, and they have a moment where they both realize that they have some chemistry and there's a sense of belonging for them both, and they officially share their names, as this is the start of a beautiful but also tragic relationship. Now, we cut to seeing Gemma getting her blood collected this time by this unknown nurse who I believe we're meeting for the first time. She asks Gemma where she went during this experience. Now, I think it's important to establish early on that we're experiencing different moments in time from both Gemma and Mark throughout this episode. So with that, both characters, Mark and Gemma, are under extreme stress and very different circumstances throughout this episode as they're remembering their past. So it's important to note that they are considered, in my eyes, unreliable narrators at these certain points of the episode, because it's what they remember and it doesn't necessarily mean that it happened in the way that we're seeing it. Now, with that, we get this flashback sequence where I'm assuming this is early on in the relationship between Mark and Gemma, where we see them waking up together on a sunny, beautiful day and enjoying each other's company. As we cut to Mark present day on his couch from the final moments of episode 6, so I took that flashback maybe being a part of Gemma's memory, but also a little bit of Mark's. Now, Ragabi says that Mark will be okay. He might have some deficits, but nothing long term. But to Devon, this all sounds like medical jargon, and she just wants to know if her brother will make it out alive. Now, Devon is clearly confused by this whole situation and doesn't exactly know if she can trust this stranger in her brother's house. Is she a doctor? Is this a nurse or a random person who's asking if she's too clumsy to handle the equipment in Mark's basement? Now, Ragabi tells her that Mark is reintegrated, but Devon isn't playing around, and she demands that she stops the procedure or else she's going to throw her off of a bridge. Now, Devon gets a concrete understanding to why Mark did this as she finds out that Gemma is alive, and we see she's taken aback by this information. Now, here we see Gemma continuing what's believed to be this daily, weekly, or monthly routine on the testing floor where she undergoes the blood test. Here we see her getting her weight checked in, and you also notice the goats next to the eye exam reading one of many goat sightings in this episode. Here we see her doing some type of lie detector test as she's asked if she's eaten, if she's read, and if she's done her workout for today, which she responds yes. Now next she's asked if she was caught in a mudslide, would she be more afraid of suffocating or drowning, and Gemma responds by saying drowning, and it appears that she answered all the questions correctly. Now Gemma has to partake in 6 rooms for the day, and you notice her sense of disapproval, but also the nurse even seemed to have a response that felt that she was maybe even guilty to what Gemma has to go through, so maybe she might be an ally at some point later this season. Now Gemma sees the outfit that's been picked out for her for the day, and we see her response is one that points towards her being unhappy to what's associated with what comes with wearing that particular outfit, and that is going to the dentist, as this episode shows that these rooms are the ones she's visited quite frequently. We watch as Gemma and the nurse makes their way down the hallway, and we get to see all the various file names on the door, the same names that we've seen the MDR workers working on throughout the show. As we later see what some of these rooms entail, does this now confirm that the MDR department is responsible for refining Gemma's chip to alter or replace or refine her mood or personality to fit the 4 tempers for each time she goes into those rooms? We see they've arrived to the first of 6 for the day, and it's the Wellington room. Now, Wellington happens to be the capital of New Zealand, but also can mean boot or being from a wealthy estate, so not sure what it has to do with dental work. Either way, we see the room is only accessible by those with proper clearance, as there is a hand recognition device that takes the blood from the person granting access as Gemma walks in and we see her enters. Now the question is, who is this version of Gemma? Her demeanor and personality to me doesn't seem exactly to match the one of Miss Casey, which makes me believe that again, the MDR department is refining different variations of Gemma that enters each room. Now throughout the episode, we see this now dentist who later becomes a doctor and plays a husband and a flight attendant. He plays all these different roles throughout these different situations, and we'll discuss more on him later, on him maybe being the most despicable character so far in the show. Now we see this version of any Gemma only seems to experience this particular room, and she says that she was just here, but she's told that it's been 6 weeks. We see this version that Annie is afraid of being here, and I don't blame her because I am not a fan of going to the dentist. It is very stressful and it could be quite scary as well. Now, placing this into reference to where it's taking place in the timeline of the show, based on him in his dental outfit, plus him whistling the same song from episode 5, I'm to assume that this exact scene is taking place directly after the opening scene of episode 5, where he got the dental equipment from Felicia and Elizabeth. Now we see Audi Gemma is back, and she's told that she was in the Wellington room for over 2 hours, and she seems to be showing some visible discomfort after leaving. Now, of course, personal hygiene and taking care of your teeth is essential, but there seems to be some significance to us being shown how he had to be given the equipment from O&D, and how and why it takes 2 hours to work on her teeth that already seem perfect. What's so important about Wellington? I can't quite figure that out yet. Now, on our way back to the next room, we see that Gemma notices Cole Harbor, which is brought up later in this episode. Now, as we transition from that into present day Mark, which again, the craftsmanship behind this week's episode was just spectacular. The transitions were so top notch, and later I'm gonna geek out on one of my favorite moments of this entire episode. Now, back on the couch, we see Devon's concern over her brother's safety, as this leads into another crazy transition into what looked like the inside of his couch, into seeing another flashback from Mark's memory to seeing him in the elevator to paying a visit to Gemma at work. Now we see that he's all giddy and slightly nervous as he's got a gift for her, and it's an ant farm after what seemed to be their first date together. Now we know that Gemma is a teacher of Russian literature, and I was trying to find any Easter eggs or important things in her office. I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary, but let me know if you all found anything in the comments below. But I do want to point out something here. Before Mark walked into her office, I couldn't get a clear shot of her last name, but it looked like it started with a C and it ended in an I. Now, I'm not sure if not seeing her last name has any significance to the story. We obviously know that once she married Mark, it was Gemma Scout, but I am very curious on if we haven't seen her last name is because it does have some significance, and we'll talk about this in a second here. Now, from here, we see the passage of time in their relationship, and again, from Mark's perspective, as he's recently purchased a baby crib, indicating that they've been together for a little bit now as they're ready to have a baby. Now, from here, we get this beautiful, and I mean beautiful montage of them together over what was most likely years at this point, as there's even a shot of her with her wedding ring to confirm that some time has passed. It was just so beautiful to see this, and I feel like I was watching a scene out of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as we see them together and they're just seamlessly happy. Now, taking a brief moment to kind of talk about this for a second, for me, one of the most difficult parts of connecting to the Gemma story up until this point was the fact that we hadn't spent any time with Gemma and Mark together in their Audi form, so there was like a disconnect for me of not really having that true connection for him yearning to be reunited with his wife. But here's the catcher of this episode. This episode has completely changed my perception of their relationship, and more importantly, it's now put this huge feeling of being torn on seeing this love story between Annie, Mark, and Helly, and Helena and Annie, Mark, and taking interest of Helena and Audi, Mark last week, but now seeing Audi, Mark, and Gemma and their love story just adds more layers to this already complicated situation. Now, cut to what I consider to be one of the most shocking moments of this episode as we have this couple's dinner between Mark and Gemma and Devon, and then we have this stranger here who looks like Rickon, and they say he's Rickon, but no way that's him, right? Jokes aside, we have heard from Devon referencing to this very exact moment that there was a point in time that they were very close, but obviously things were different after Gemma's death. But going back to seeing this different side of Rickon, like he's not as pompous and as, I don't want to say arrogant, but he's definitely different. You can see his mood change. Obviously, he physically looks different with the mustache. But again, it was just nice to see this flashback, but also see that Rick and Mark did get along at one point. Now, this was a very nice moment. I really love this little moment here between Gemma and Devon. It was just, what's the word? Tender, I would say, right? It's where Gemma doesn't take a drink without saying a word on why she's not taking a drink, but Devon understood it, and it was because her and Mark were expecting their first child. Now again, yet another example of the beautiful editing in this episode. We see the time passing from that scene into the night where we find Gemma in the bathroom, and we see that she's unfortunately experiencing a miscarriage. Now, as she gets in the shower and rightfully sad and upset, as Mark comes in to immediately comforting her. Now, earlier I mentioned I'm going to talk about my favorite part of this episode, and it's this scene right here. And it's not the moment of the scene because obviously this is heartbreaking, this is sad, but I'm referring to like the editing and how this scene was put together. We get this almost Inception moment where time is going backwards and we see the water in reverse on their faces. And this shot right here where Mark is transported into the MDR department from season 1 after Helly's elevator situation. Remember what the title of this episode means and think about how this scene right here perfectly illustrates both Audi and Annie Mark on their journey, and both of them experiencing moments in time where they've been with Gemma and Miss Casey. This whole scene was amazing and truly transcended this story to a whole different level for me. Now, from Audi, Mark into Annie experiencing moments and filling in the blanks of their lives, we get into this shot of the inside of this cord that's connected to a database and takes us into a shot of someone tapping their foot at their desk who's observing the interaction between Miss Casey and Annie Mark. Now, this is another new character that we're meeting for the first time, and in the end credits, this person is credited as the Watcher of Mark. Now we see that this is actually a department within itself, and it's them watching the MDR workers refining and watching all the moments that they're doing at their desk. Now we see this observation over time, and I could be completely wrong, but if you look closely, each observer almost mirrors who they're watching. You notice the woman has red hair, just like Helly. We have the guy with the glasses who looks similar to Dylan, and you even have this guy with the similar mustache to Irv. Now, the question is, are these employees severed? Are they literally always watching every single thing they do at their desk, and they know everything that they've been talking about since season 1? And are they similar to the Shadow Twins from the 4th episode of this season? Now, we hear Drummond asking if the Severance barrier is holding as we see him next to the doctor, who confirms that the technology is working. Now, to me, this conversation isn't pertaining to the MDR technology, because obviously we know that technology has been working for years at this point, but this was referring to Gemma's tech, with her visiting each room and having different experiences in each one and not remembering any of it, and this is confirmed a little bit later in this episode. Now, this is where the doctor is outed by Drummond for liking Gemma, in which he responds by saying that it's easy to like her and that she likes him as well. So he's clearly delusional and has grown this obsession and attachment to Gemma, and I would imagine he has done things in the past that aren't supposed to be a part of the experiment for his own benefit. Now here we see Gemma is in another outfit, headed back into her room from another exhausting day. Now this cuts into a memory that I feel is Gemma's memory to her time that Mark and her paid a visit to the doctor's office. Now we know that Lumen has their hands in everything in Cure, as you'll notice that when they're sitting down, there's the doctor looking directly at Gemma as they pass him by. Now we later hear what Devon's plans were for Mark later, but to jump to the doctor scene here, this might not be the first time that we saw him back in episode 5. If you go back to a scene in season 1 where Devon is trying to get the attention of what she believed to be a doctor working at the cabin, take a look at this individual's hair, as to me it's safe to assume that this is the same person. Has he been spying on the Scout family for a very long time at this point? Now this scene, we hear Mark say that this is the next steps that a lot of people take, as it's inferred that they're here for Gemma to start her IVF treatments. Now, small little moment, but my heart broke when she apologized to Mark because of them being here and her having to get these treatments. Now you'll notice that when she's filling out the form, and if you see on the left corner here, it's the same Lumen signal that we've been seeing throughout the series, letting us know that this is where Lumen first got their hands on Gemma. Again, might be a nothing burger, but the show intentionally doesn't show us Gemma's last name when she's filling out the form, which again makes me think that her last name must be something of importance. Now before moving on, something else I want to point out about this scene that was a little bit odd. It goes back to the meaning of this episode, but also mentioning the unreliable narrator. Gemma sees this little girl here, but when the camera pans out to end the scene, that little girl is missing. Was this an actual memory, or was this created by the treatments under Lumen? Now this could explain why we saw the doctor in that scene, but it also could explain a theory I shared in my most recent theory video on Hannah being the daughter and that she's alive, and that might have been her right here. Now cut back to seeing Gemma in her room after recalling that possibly altered memory, as we see time passing and we see Mark and Lumen's halls changing his clothes. Again, the attention to detail in this episode was spectacular. Like, they built a dresser in the middle of a hallway to showcase this transition. Just incredible work. But to me, this moment here is outie Mark sharing with any Mark a memory to a time that Mark and Gemma began the IVF treatment for the third time. Again, with my Hannah theory, listen to what Mark says to Gemma.
And, there's a kid just out there just waiting for us. Just gotta reach out and grab her.
Again, him referencing her. Did they have Hannah as a name as what they were hoping to be their first child? Now that flashback leads us into Gemma with the doctor being observed, and we see the same frame from the end of episode 1 of this season with Gemma's vitals, and we see the chip in her head as Mark Observer watches. Now they discuss her experience throughout the day of visiting the 6 rooms and how she left feeling after. Now this is where she confirms that not remembering what happened in the inside of those rooms.
How did you feel in the hall? Did you exit any of the rooms feeling despair, fervor, gaiety?
Notice all the terms he used mean things like passionate feeling and lightheartedness and cheerfulness. To me, this is where the doctor is seeing if she enjoyed her time with someone in particular in those rooms, and that person being him. Now she questions him about Cold Harbor and what happens when she's been a part of all the rooms, and that being the one that she hasn't been a part of quite yet.
You will see the world again, and the world will see you.
See, Mark?
Mark will benefit from the world you're siring. Kier will take away all his pain, just as Kier has taken away yours.
Now, what exactly did he mean by that? Is this intent to experiment, observe, and learn from Gemma's alleged death, and once completed, they mean to let her back into the regular world like nothing happened? Does what they're doing lean into the ongoing theory that I've had since seeing this show since season 1, that what they're using her for is to indeed resurrect Kier Egan and send him back into the world in which they want him to live in and change, and they believe that this will be for the betterment of mankind? Now we cut to another memory here where we see Gemma in the bathroom upset to what seems to be yet another failed IVF treatment. Now back with Mark, Ragabi, and Devon, she says that he's stable and this is believed to be an isolated incident. Now this is probably the only time that I've been actually annoyed by Devon in this scene. Now she explains her idea that she briefly mentioned at the end of episode 6. She believes the cabin she gave birth to will allow her to communicate with any version of Mark, but Ragabi lets her know how different those things are compared to what she's doing with Mark with the reintegration process. Now this upsets Devon and leads her to wanting to get Harmony involved. Ragabi reminds her who Harmony is and how she'll immediately turn Devon in if she calls her. Now Devon dismisses her advice and proceeds to call her as Ragabi packs up her things and leaves, leaving Devon alone with Mark. Now I love Devon, don't get me wrong, but her idea was quite frankly stupid. Let's call the woman who we believe took our baby and for 3 years lived next to my brother, lying about everything, and you think that she was going to be in service to you and helping you out in this situation? Now the scene in general was kind of confusing because Ragabi says not to call before leaving, but moments before we see Devon on the phone with the phone on her ear, which to me kind of inferred that she called her but she didn't pick up her phone, so it was just kind of weird how it all played out. Now it's going to be interesting if next time we see Cobell, she is going to be seeing her phone, like she sees an incoming call coming in from Devon, and maybe that will be like her motivation to get her back into Kier to finish what she started. Now after Ragabi left, we see Mark briefly comes to and whispers the name of this episode under his breath. Now this leads right into a flashback to him questioning some new items from the doctor's office.
It's the same guy fighting himself, defeating his own psyche. Ego death.
We see the same cards from season 1 that Devon took from OND and later got Milchick in trouble, as we learn that the meaning of these cards are a reference to the idea behind the title of this episode. Now Gemma says that she's got this because she was on the mailing list from the clinic, which again tells me that Lumen got involved and they've slowly implemented themselves into their lives. It's almost like they've been giving her these little subliminal messaging to Gemma to get her closer and closer to Lumen, which is starting to make me theorize what happens to Gemma with the alleged car accident. Was she in on what happens to her, or again was she just taken without her permission? Now her doing this leads to us seeing their first disagreement about her partaking in these activities, and here we see the first remnants of the a-hole version that we've seen of Mark before. Now Gemma expresses how she's feeling after doing all these efforts of having no baby yet, and Mark doesn't comfort her, he doesn't consult her, but instead he suggests that they just stop, and we see how this affected her. Now back with Gemma waking up, and again we see the redundancy of how she's been living for the last 3 years, of her waking up, doing her morning routine, her getting dressed, to her doing her rounds in the rooms. Now this time around we see her in a wig from the 80s as she's dressed in blue under distress from an airplane experiencing insane turbulence. Yet again we see the doctor playing a role as a flight attendant. Now from seeing her stressed out at the dentist earlier in this episode to seeing this scene and later seeing the whole husband and wife scenario, is the purpose of this experiment to put her in stressful positions to see if the refining to remove her emotions work? Because if so, they don't seem to be working so far. Or is it just to test putting her through all these stressful and painful feelings to see if her outie feels any of these things and if she carries into her outie's feelings? That so far seems to be what I believe these experiments are doing. Also, just a side note, how large is Lumen underground? From them having this simulated version of an airplane going through this turbulence, like you have to imagine their monthly budget has to be somewhere in the hundreds of millions, if not the billions. Now back to getting our understanding of time, we see that Mark is stuck at 96% as Drummond says that his nosebleeds stop him from proceeding. So now we know we're just around the same time of last episode. As he mentions that it was a nosebleed that caused a delay, I'm thinking to myself, it wasn't the sex that he had with Helly, which makes me think that they really did remove the cameras from the hallways. Now here's where we see more of Gemma's everyday living, from her eating and drinking and reading and even working out. But we also hear Drummond telling the doctor that once Mark is done, he's gonna have to say goodbye to Gemma for cure, and he repeats the same thing. Again, not to beat a dead goat, but the line seems to confirm that this is all being done to resurrect Cure. Now here we see another room where it's always Christmas and it's Allentown. We see her undergoing more physical pain, in which she has to write these thank you letters to the neighbors for the gift they receive, and I bet she's been doing this for hours, very similar to what she does with the dental work, which would explain the pain in her hand. Now you'll also notice yet another goat sighting on the notepad here. Now this situation has any Gemma and the doctor as a married couple, which I bet he just loves that idea. Speaking of love, as she's finished, he tells her that he loves her, and she is basically forced to say that she loves him back. Now, I'm not sure if they showed outie Gemma kind of coming out in this particular scene, or if it was just a part of a wife hating her husband, making her do the thing that she had to do in Allentown. Now back in the room, Gemma remembers being married at a time that her and Mark were at odds with this whole baby situation. Now as Mark is putting together the baby crib, but out of frustration with the whole situation with not being able to get pregnant, he breaks the little parts that he was able to put together. He tears that apart, as you get a feeling that this is probably where at this point in the relationship they were at rock bottom. Now, as we come towards the back half of this episode, we see that the doctor, whose name, by the way, is first mentioned in this scene as Dr. Mauser, not sure if that's his actual name or if it was just made up. Now, this is the routine for him to check in with her at the end of the day, but you notice the personal attachment that's making its way into this conversation. Gemma says that she wants to leave and go home, as the doc tells her a lie and says that Mark has been remarried and now has, yet again, a daughter. Now, Gemma refuses to believe this, but there may be some truth into what he said, considering the whole Helena Helly of it all and the idea that she may be pregnant with maybe a girl. Either way, we see him telling her that Mark has moved on and maybe it's time for her to do the same, and she may have moved on in those rooms, and he insinuates that she's fallen for another person in those rooms and she may have feelings for them that she may have never experienced with Mark. Now, this level of arrogance causes him to literally underestimate Gemma's resilience, as she knocks him out with a chair and takes his key card. Now we watch as she tries to make her escape by carefully not trying to get caught, but unfortunately the nurse sees her, but she manages to make her way into the elevator. Now unfortunately her chip is activated and Miss Casey returns to the severed floor for the first time this season. As she makes her way to the door, and remembering the timing of everything, this is the same day, now night, of the last episode where Mark passed out, and just making that parallel connection of the two stories of them experiencing a similar situation of almost reaching the finish line. Now I say almost because we see Milchick leaving for the night, and I say night because we saw in the last scene that it was 7:30 when the doctor was paying Gemma a visit, and we know that Seth stayed at work to do his whole review thing. As we watch Milchick do the same thing that he did to Miss Casey last time she was sent back to the testing floor, as he makes up some lie and kindly demands that she goes back to the elevator, which she does. Again, at this point, I don't know about you all, but I just felt so damn bad for both outie Gemma and also any Gemma, or in this case, Miss Casey. Now we'll come back to the scene, but we see our final flashback that ties both memories together. As we see the night of Gemma's alleged death, we see her heading out for a night of games, and I believe she was probably going to Devon's and Rickens' house, but Mark's got work and he doesn't leave with her, a regret you'll imagine haunts him every day after seeing that he could have possibly stopped everything that's going to happen to her from happening. Now, to make this even more unsettling and even more heartbreaking, we see Gemma telling Mark that she loves him, and at first he doesn't respond until she has to repeat it, and just knowing this is the last thing he said to her and how he didn't give her a hug or a kiss or a goodbye or again even leave with her, it's just heartbreaking. Now, speaking of heartbreaking, we come to the most emotional conclusion of any episode of the show so far, as we cut between Mark seeing the cops arriving to his house and getting the news about Gemma, and just how incredibly shocked this is as they capture him literally and metaphorically being in the dark to what happened to Gemma. And bringing it back to Gemma, back on the testing room floor, to her seeing the nurse and seeing the parallel of the two scenes of Mark getting the bad news and being at rock bottom, and then paralleling to seeing Gemma now on the floor of the elevator and how she's at the lowest point of trying to escape this living hell. Truly an example of the spectacular direction in this episode. As we end with Audi and Annie Mark now as one after experiencing each other's memories with Gemma and Miss Casey, and seeing them, or should I say him, crying together, knowing how close Mark was to seeing his wife every day as Miss Casey, as Annie Mark got to experience the highs and lows of their relationship. As Devon welcomes him back, but we're left to seeing Mark broken and crying after experiencing this journey that he went through in this episode. Man, talk about crying, as was I, because man, this episode put us through the ringer of emotions. Finally seeing Gemma and Mark's relationship, but more importantly, seeing the kindness of Gemma and the fight that she has to get back to her life and get back to Mark was just so gut-wrenching, but also a remarkable moment for television. We've never seen a story within this show being told in this way, and I can't give enough praise to the incredible acting from all the actors, but especially from the actress who plays Gemma. My goodness, this was a world-class performance from beginning to end, and again, this just changes the whole romantic dynamic between Mark and Helena and Helly, and I want to see Gemma and Mark back together again. The cinematography, the score, the editing, again, the direction, the way the show was just shot and just put together, everything about this episode to me was damn near perfect. Now, I'm obviously pre-recording this, but I'm confident in saying this, that this is a moment in television history where we'll look back in years from now and say to ourselves, man, do you remember that incredible 7th episode where we got the backstory of Gemma and just how incredible that was? I'll just speak for myself. I think this is one of those special episodes of television. There you have it. You have made it to the end of this week's breakdown. I can't thank y'all enough for the continued support so far this season. I always love seeing that you all make it to the very end of the video. So if you are still here, thank you for the support. Do me a favor, put in the comments right now, #Gemma. Please share all your thoughts about the episode below. If you are not aware, every Monday I make a Severance theory video in response to reacting to you all's great theories and deeper meanings. So again, share your major talking points, your ideas, your deeper understandings, your big theories in the comments below. Now, if you all enjoyed this breakdown and want to show me some love and support, hit that like button. Let's try to get this to over 2,000 likes on the YouTube portion, and consider sharing this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show. And if this is your first time here, welcome to the community. Hope you all had a good time. Consider sticking around, checking out my other Severance content, and also just my other content in general, and subscribe to the channel. And if you all want to take the support even further, consider joining the channel memberships. Don't forget, you all are awesome. Stay safe, and remember,
here, chosen one, here.